Hello and welcome to this interview between Barrier Networks and CISCO Networks. My name is Jordan Schroder. I'm the managing CISO for Barrier, and I have the distinct pleasure to be speaking with Yves Mertens and Colin McMillan on a discussion around zero trust and specifically around SASE. These are topics that have a lot of thought that are being swirled around about them right now, and we have a lot of different people with a lot of different concerns. And from the studies that I've seen and all the talk with other CISOs and other security people that I've seen, there are a lot of people who want to delve into zero trust and implement and get the benefits of zero trust and SASE in their organizations. But it's a little murky right now, and it's a little confusing, and there's a lot of new acronyms and a lot of new ideas, a lot of new things that a lot of people need to learn. And so what I hope we can do in this discussion is I'd love to talk with the experts and get their understandings of some of these ideas and help you and help me and help us figure out where we need to go next, what our next steps need to be, how we need to plan, what the problems are, and some discussion and some thought on how to take those initial steps and what things need to do and what you need to plan for and what you need to prepare for. So I'd like to thank Yves and Colin for joining me today. And so I want to start off with a pretty general question, or a pretty open question, which is, what are the major market trends in cybersecurity today?
So, obviously we're going to come on to the subject of SASE and zero trust, so sort of accepting them as one of the primary and major trends. One of the big areas that we're certainly focusing on is identity first, right? And decentralized identity is becoming more and more important. No longer is it MFA, but it's, how many factors of authentication? How can we make sure that an asset that a user is on is a trusted asset? How do we make sure that it has the right level of patches and isn't vulnerable? I'm not sure how contemporary this will be as we go in, but we've obviously had the Apache Log4j issue in the last recent while. But one of the other areas, Jordan, that I certainly see a lot of challenges around is in the OT space. We're starting to see the surfacing of older technologies in the OT space, particularly in areas like oil and gas, but more importantly in CNI, like critical national infrastructure, where we're starting to see governments and public sector agencies becoming very, very nervous about how that could potentially become weaponized. So that's another area where we're looking at risk-based assessments of customers' environments, particularly in that OT space, but more importantly, the whole real estate that they might have from an endpoint perspective. And then maybe three, if you give me that, next generation SOC. That's something else that's causing great concern for customers, is how they keep control over their enterprises, small, medium or large, and indeed how they can keep on top of the overwhelming nature of all the tools that we as vendors provide them, and how they make sense of that, and what services they can use from companies like yourself, where they can adjunct what they have in terms of their SOC capability. And they're probably the top three things that I'm currently speaking to customers about.
That's interesting, and those are new and emerging and big changes in the industry, and just things that affect everybody in a pretty big way. So yeah, that's some pretty big changes that we're seeing. What would you say? Let me ask it this way: what is SASE then? And what does it do for a company or an organization?
Okay, so we've got Gartner to thank for SASE, right? Gartner came up with this category. And fundamentally, Jordan, it converges SD-WAN, security control points, and you mentioned acronyms earlier, so let me reel off a few. You've got firewall as a service, CASB in terms of application brokering, secure web gateway, zero trust networks, as we already pointed out, and bringing all of those together, what were effectively siloed categories in companies before, and bringing them in a kind of cloud native format. And you mentioned at the very, very beginning about some of the challenges customers will face. That's not an easy thing to do, right? And not all customers want to go there in necessarily in one go and don't have the capacity to do that. But fundamentally, it's going from products in a category and going more to solutions, right? Solutions and experiences for our customers. And over the last couple of years, we've seen a massive transition from what was the traditional working environment in place to this new hybrid model that we have in many cases, where the infrastructure we had fundamentally doesn't meet the business needs anymore. So fundamentally for a customer, it's about reducing cost, minimizing risk, and basically enabling the business in a more agile way. Yves, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, and maybe I give a glitch on the partner side that I see today is that there is a big demand from our customers. I have heard that a number around, I think it's 85% of the enterprise customers will move to SASE in the coming 2 years. So that there is a big demand, a big ask there. Like Colin was mentioning, you have that network angle in there where I think Cisco is still the leader into the market, and where you can see today the demand of the customer to see how they can move their environments from, let's say, the traffic who was very centralized to a more decentralized environment and make it optimal, okay, and secure from the edge. And there is a lot, I would say, ask from our partners coming to Cisco and are asking to, Cisco, what is the SASE play for us in the coming years? And I think Barrier Networks is one of them, I think, and it's important that we guide the partners and also the customers on where we're going, because SASE is not what I would say, it's not something you do in one step, okay? There are many steps to get there, in my opinion, okay?
And that brings me to the next question then. I've got clients and I've got customers that are looking at their infrastructure. They're one of these 80 plus, 90 plus % of the organizations that are looking to switch over to SASE or gain the benefits of SASE. And I've got a client who is just at the start of that process and is looking at massive transformation, massive digital transformation in terms of taking things on-prem and taking them off-prem and making them more cloud accessible. And other clients that have, quite a mix, and they want to secure the things that are in the cloud and bring things under a more cohesive identity policy and access policy and authentication policy. They want all these benefits. But the question that I get from a lot of these, and I'm seeing this also from my peers online and in the social networks, is how do you start, or how do you envision the roadmap? Do you just take over everything that you need, all your infrastructure? Because as you said, Colin, you've got firewalls, you've got SD-WAN, you've got service brokering. Do you take everything that you need to do, map it all out, and transform it all to SASE? Or do you take bits and pieces slowly migrate and slowly mutate your infrastructure and your security over to SASE? Do you take a big bang approach, or do you do it step by step and you take it slow? What would you recommend for both efficiency and security?
So a lot of question in there, Jordan, but I do like your analogy to Big Bang, and I think there will be very few customers, very few who would be able to take the Big Bang approach, and in fact, I would suggest that wouldn't be the right approach in most cases. There'll be some small agile companies that will be able to do that, but there'll be a great number who fundamentally cannot, right? And I think basically it will be different for different companies, different company size and different company form. If you have a very small organization that potentially don't have the security staff within the organization to own that, they can migrate pretty much wholesale to a service, right? So if there is a MSP or any other kind of service provider who could offer a full SASE in a box, and they're only 50 people, then, subscribe to the service and hey presto, you're there. The reality is we're dealing with typically larger organizations, from mid-market through to very large enterprises. And the reality is they will already have some aspects of SASE within their portfolio. So they may have remote VPN already. And we saw a massive influx of remote VPN when unfortunately the coronavirus hit, that they needed to expand that, right? So they have a massive real estate of that. They already have, to a degree, varying parts of the journey of SD-WAN already, and I think you mentioned at the outset, this is a journey for most of these companies, right? Whether they would like to go full SASE tomorrow, it's not achievable for them. Then they start looking at, how do they get direct internet access? How do they then secure that? And one interesting aspect of it, Jordan, is we've seen a lot of customers during the pandemic go into cloud when they weren't really ready to do that, because they thought they had to expand into the cloud. And many of them are now coming back to a hybrid solution because they exposed themselves to a lot more risk that they weren't ready for. So, it's almost like the expansion of the universe with Big Bang, but then a contraction back again, right? And then beyond all of that, once you get past the direct internet access, you've got zero trust network, right? And there's a lot of companies who want to do, as I said, one of the emerging trends is identity first and decentralized identity. And it's, how do they do that? So they want to expand their zero trust network access and have full secure internet gateways, right? So for many large enterprises and many customers, that's a journey, and I think typically that's what we would see. Typically though, that is quite a long journey, right? And some customers will, let's say they're in the middle ground from being small, can adopt a cloud operated service to that larger enterprise. There's some in the middle that may choose to augment their SD-WAN and their existing security portfolio and take some services from the cloud to adjunct what they've already got and get themselves to a further down the road stage of SASE. So in my opinion, Big Bang, it would be fantastic if it could be done, but the reality is it's very difficult to accelerate the journey.
Yeah, if
So
I may
then,
add, Jordan,
go ahead.
maybe let me add something on what Colin told there. I think there is an element certainly for these big customers out there, which is related to also the applications they are running. Okay, you have typically legacy applications where depending the way you can access them is still gonna be remaining, and you will need to do the whole considerations when doing that digital or cloud transformation in the whole transition you want to do there. So personally, I don't believe, maybe for small companies you can go in Big Bang, but I think the bigger the companies are, the more legacy they have, the more time it will take to get there. The other element, I think Colin said it to that, and let me explore a little bit more on that. What I see today, there is a shortage on talent in cybersecurity, and there are a lot of customers, but also partners that are coming to us to say, okay, with the demand of our customers, we need to start to setting up a managed service for it, okay? Where basically we're gonna, through SLAs, we're gonna do the A to Z there. So also from that perspective, yeah, we are being consulted a lot. We are in play a lot with partners and customers, and we are building together with these customers and partners. We're building out the service play that they can further develop as we speak. And it's not also like a one in a box solution. I think there is work to be done, I would say, by the partner who will deliver that service, where there is API integrations that need to happen. We have an open portfolio which give the capabilities to to partners with DevOps teams to develop that instances to make it on the demand of the customer and build it out like that. Yeah, so a lot of ask there and a lot of also learnings from what's existing in the customer networks today and how a partner can contribute to leverage the service around that.
So are you saying, Yves, that you're seeing partners doing a managed service for Zero Trust or SASE or the parts of SASE in order to make this more possible, make this easier for clients?
Yes, that's exactly what I meant, and yeah, like Colin was calling out the different cloud security elements. Some of these customers, they don't start with the whole enchilada, okay? They're starting because they have today what I would say, and the way we're building out our solutions on SASE from an SD1 perspective is related to the Viptela play and the Meraki play, and then adding a layer of security in there, which is umbrella, or which is the first layer of security to preventing malicious host to be connected into existing networks, can be a first layer, I would say, in the whole SASE play. Okay, and that's I would say today the call out to say it is SASE or it is full SASE. In that example, it's not. But is it a SASE-like? Is it a baby step in your Bing Bang to call it out? Yes, it is, and it will put the entrance security in the scope basically of the demand of the layer. And what I see now with partners is that they started with umbrella as an example, and then they move to the identity of secure access, which is coming from the Duo acquisition in there. They're adding for endpoint in there. So it's a gradual, I would say, build up of that managed services, like I can tell you. Okay.
The progression that you just mentioned is interesting to me. So umbrella, Duo, and then AMP for endpoint. Is that a typical or a sustainable or a recommended path to start this journey in a way that's sustainable and is going to provide the most benefit in the least time?
So it is one example I'm mentioning. It's not by default what I would say the ideal spot, but what you have with Zero Trust, Colin was alluding to it. It's really a market trend on the identity, where you have in your whole cybersecurity architecture the continuous authentication, verification through the layer of security across the architecture, which is a quite critical one. But there are other components from the portfolio that also Colin expressed, like the virtual firewall in there, the gateway in there, the web gateway in there, the DLP piece in there, the RBI, which is the remote browser. So these are all components. But again, through the assessments we are doing and the demand, how far a customer wants to go and how far a partner wants to build up that service, that's what we need to go after together with partners to make it usable and having the right SLAs with the customers today.
Yeah, and maybe just as a sentence to add on to the end of that, to your question, Jordan, a lot of these, the choices at which point these become important is quite vertically aligned, right? So where compliance is an issue in a banking environment versus a retail environment versus oil and gas, for example, it varies dramatically depending on the risk appetite of the company itself.
Okay. All right. So step one is do that assessment, right? So not to choose something from the portfolio, but the step one is to do that assessment and figure out where you need to be in that portfolio, what you need to tackle first.
Exactly.
So as you've mentioned, there are a lot of different components and there are a lot of different bits and pieces under the massive topic of SASE and Zero Trust. So there are a lot of vendors and a lot of providers and a lot of security providers and a lot of products out there that all fit within that that category, and different vendors provide different bits and pieces. A lot of them provide the same pieces. And I know that there's a question from my peers, should we be mix and matching vendors and their solutions so that we get a more holistic view of problems and the threats and the approaches in different ways? Or should we be looking at a single ecosystem to do this in order to make it easier to integrate and make sure it all dovetails together properly? What would you recommend? Should we be looking at mixing and matching our vendors, or should we be keeping with a single vendor ecosystem?
Yeah. So maybe if I could go first, Yves. I think within that question, there's a reality versus the nirvana, right? I think a lot of companies, as we said at the outset, the precept of SASE and zero trust networking is around making a company more adaptable, more agile, and capable of moving much more quickly in the digital transformation. The reality is many of our customers have massive real estates of multi-vendor capacity built in those silos we discussed at the beginning. So it's unrealistic to expect. One we've already mentioned that big bang's very difficult because of that, right? And mixed mode environments. And as a result, to get to full SASE means there will have to be environments that are disaggregated and not unified. And whilst Gartner, since they were the ones that invented this category, they've predicted by, and forgive me, Gartner, if I get this wrong, but I think by 2024, most companies will have a strategy to go for a same vendor unified environment, and it's about a third of companies that want to be there by 2024. So I think there's an appetite to do it, Jordan, and I think the reality of the situation is it would be practically impossible. However, the major benefits of a unified environment is simplicity of management, the cost savings that would come from a unified capacity around identity, zero trust access, a homogeneous SD-WAN environment that is fully capable of protecting at the edge. For that is the E in SASE, protecting the edge as well as the core, right? So I think that unified approach is where we want to get to. There are not many vendors with a portfolio that allow them to do that right now.
Yeah, and Colin, maybe one other big advantage that I see with partners, but also with customers, like you well said, is that having today environments that are single vendor based, they are rare. But there is the element, besides the simplicity, is the whole visibility, okay? And what we have seen is that, the main challenge of the CISO today is to make sure that in time he can discover when threats or breaches are happening in his environment. And just imagine the complexity that certain customers has created to have multiple environments to capture that visibility. That's where you get into the complexity or even unseen events because of the multi-vendor approach. So one of the elements or exercises that I'm also doing with certain partners today, because you see it on the customer side, but you see it also on the partner side, because they have a multitude of people managing all these different vendors today, which from a cost perspective is quite immense, and from an education perspective is quite immense. So the more you can simplify, the more you can converge your architecture solution for your customer to a one vendor approach, will also be very beneficial for the partner from a TCO perspective. So, and that's what I'm most of the time are telling our partners today, is that I still see partners today that have 40 vendors in their portfolio, 40. So bring them back to the essential vendors that are limiting basically the overall architecture approach, certainly in a SASE environment. And I think personally that Cisco is in a very good position to position the SASE offering and their portfolio over there.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. I saw a quote from a CISO saying, I'd rather have a single vendor ecosystem and the security tools are rated at B plus than 40 vendors where each of the tools are at an A plus, because it's too difficult, it's too costly, it's too complicated, and it's too difficult to stitch all of those things together. And all the more, it's all the better if you can have one vendor that's also an A plus that provides a single ecosystem as well. We're seeing a lot of changes in networks, and the cloud has created a lot of opportunities, and it's kicked off a lot of digital transformation. COVID lockdowns and work from homes have really pushed a lot of those transformations. And I'm seeing a tipping point where even large organizations have services, business critical services, that are accessible now from the internet. And what I saw in a very, very recent survey was that large organizations now have over 50% of their services which are now exposed to the internet. It's public, right? So we're at the tipping point where our perimeter is moving on very quickly from the traditional perimeter, right? And what is Cisco's vision and what is their view of a modern company perimeter? What does the perimeter look like? What is it going to look like tomorrow? And what should we be prepared for?
Yes. Fantastic question, Jordan, to which there's a lot of answers. Now, I think there's no doubt that the perimeter's changed, right? And, the last 2 years have shown that whether organizations like it or not, there is a need to move to a completely different strategy. As Yves mentioned, applications were moving to the cloud, but that's been accelerated. There's been changes where companies have moved too quickly to the cloud, as I mentioned as well, where they've had to bring that back to a degree because they fundamentally were risk averse in those areas. We're seeing a higher degree of compliance, not only around security for endpoints, but also in terms of data, in terms of what unencrypted information is traversing the cloud, what's going on as workloads, and workload security is another massive problem. And I think one of the challenges that we face is as we expand that perimeter to almost perimeterless, identity becomes a very, very important part. And I mentioned at the beginning in terms of one of the trends is, how do we react to decentralized security? How does that fit into the zero trust network architecture? And how can we make sure that, given context and multi-factor information, how do we make sure we can make the best business choice from a risk perspective? And I think it's that maturity of identity that will help drive the security for the new perimeter. One of the other big areas that is a challenge is around sort of the asset landscape as well, right? And that comes back to context of where a customer's coming from, whether they're in the office, whether they're in the home environment, or whether they are somewhere else, remote, whatever that might be. And one of the big challenges that we're seeing is, how does a company check compliance? I mean that in the small c, in terms of compliant to their business rules, their business risks, and what they see as acceptable for their business environment, is how do we make sure that asset management can be done very easily and in a compliant way. So I think identity here, asset and vulnerability management are the key aspects now that we're seeing as more important, rather than securing necessarily the old-fashioned perimeter of the data center, for example.
Yeah, and maybe back to my visibility point, if I may, is that if you have companies moving completely to the cloud, I think it's going to be so critical to be able to analyze the traffic between applications, between global service providers that are connected to these applications like AWS, Microsoft, Azure. And I think there, from our portfolio element related also to everything we have done on the integration related to secure applications, it's very important that we have an environment where we can not only look into the visibility of workloads or network but also look to the visibility into the cloud between applications and these providers today. So even if the perimeter is changing, and I believe that we will have still a period that is going on hybrid with on-prem and cloud.
Yep.
But we as a company, we are ready to be able to look to the visibility in the clouds. And that's a quite important element of the offerings we have today, to make sure on the shift of the perimeter, like Colin is explaining, that we are capable today to have the visualization of this traffic between the different applications or applications and the provider, and even application if there is an on-premise element to the on-premise environment. And that's quite important. Besides the perimeter where we're going, that is a shift, but visibility is becoming very key, I believe, for our customers, but also our partners that are delivering that service around, to choose the right vendors to capture that visibility and deliver services around it to your customers today.
So this is all great, and I think that the promise of zero trust and SASE and these new approaches are, I think they're well understood, and at least the promise is well understood, and I think that the benefits and where we want to go and what we want to be able to capture, and the understanding that because the context has changed, that we need to secure it has changed. And I think everyone is basically okay with these ideas, with these concepts, and they'll generally accept all of them as being true. But one of the questions that arises, and we talk about visibility, and we talk about all these different technologies and all these different things, these pillars, these bits and pieces that now need to be considered and integrated and done not as a big bang, but as a slow transformation. The question that comes to mind is, okay, so if we're needing to consider all of these different parts, does that now mean that we now need to have a much larger security talent pool in our organizations in order to manage all these things? Does the zero trust and SASE mean that we need to, ramp up our hiring and find people to run all this? Or does this mean that we can have fewer security people and our need is going to be a lot less because we're not having to shore up an old model because we're using more automated tools and different tools that can perhaps adapt on the fly and in real time? What does this mean that we're going to absolutely need to kick our HR processes into high gear in order to make this work? Or does this mean that we can actually save ourselves that effort and the challenge of trying to find people in the talent pool when the talent pool currently, as you mentioned, is very small? Does this mean more people or less people for security?
I think the answer is it doesn't necessarily mean less people. Bearing in mind that SASE and zero trust in the context we've been discussing it is about streamlining, reducing complexity. But I think what the challenge with all of that complexity is, we've got a lot of security professionals overwhelmed with, as we've described, multifaceted security systems that they actually don't even know necessarily what to focus on and where to focus. And don't get the time until they actually have a breach or an incident response that they need to deal with, and they don't even know necessarily where to go and get the sources of truth. So I think SASE and zero trust basically gives us the ability to manage more effectively, automate a lot more, and reduce that complexity. But what it will do is, where we've got security professionals, it will allow them the time to then go and focus on what is being prioritized, either whether it's risk-based or whether it is alerts that they're getting from all the threat feeds that they ingest, or for the smaller companies, right down to the very, very smallest of companies, they can take that as a service so that they can focus the limited number of staff they've got on the primary alerts that they are getting from their hosted service, for example. So I think really the answer, Jordan, is, one, we know there is a limited talent pool and everybody is struggling, right, to recruit the right people. I think what it'll do, it will allow us to focus on the key aspects of the whole point of security as a concept within an enterprise, allow them to focus on the things that are material to that particular enterprise, rather than just managing the complexity of the day-to-day challenge. So I think The answer is in some cases there may be cost savings for a company to go to SASE and Zero Trust, definitely, but it will allow them to then look at how they put those resources into the more meaningful things for them.
Yeah, let me add one other facet that I think is important for customers, but also for partners, is that cybersecurity, regardless of the solution you want to bring to the market, or you want to secure into your environment from an architecture perspective, meaning, is it about secure collaboration? Is it about secure data center? Is it about secure my network? I think there is, besides of the fact of less or more people, I think the most important facet that I see is that the people from the different line of businesses that today are still in isolation need to work more together. Need to work together and making sure that, you always see with customers a cybersecurity team, you see an IT department who are more concerned about the networking. You have even data center team, you have application teams today. I think there is, for me, a facet around cybersecurity that all these line of business, with the challenge that the CISO has today, that they need to make it secure to avoid to have breaches, is to make sure that these people is working more together in a way to make the things secure. And I think that's an important element. If in the end is that with less or more people, or even outsourcing the environment, because the environment there is a ask to not recruit anymore, but have it managed by a partner. I think that are the facets that I see today, besides also the fact of just having more or less talent, okay? But it's having the organization realizing them that it's not only about networking, it's about today the whole architecture of communication or data, voice, call it out to make it secure in a certain way. Yeah, so that's for me a key element.
And that's a powerful statement, that because we've siloed things out so much and we have these isolated teams so much, that we're losing that flexibility, and we're losing the ability to have and learn from all of these people, and for them to learn, and for them to be able to leverage what they've got, and not make cybersecurity, someone else's job, right? That it's that department that keeps things secure. That's their responsibility. But to bring that more in-house in all of these teams and all of these structures, yes, that's definitely a very powerful statement. So I want to thank Yves and Colin for their time today, and thank you to Cisco for setting this up and making this happen. And thank you also for listening and watching, and hope that you've got something from this discussion on SASE and Zero Trust and have learned a little bit more about how Cisco approaches things. And if you want to know anything more, and if you would like to have any other discussions on this, feel free to contact Barrier Networks or Cisco and be able to have your questions on Zero Trust and SASE answered, so that your organization is properly secured and properly performant in the new realities that we're dealing with, and make sure that you're getting the most out of your cloud and out of your network and out of your security. So thank you very much for joining me today, and see you next time.